Hi, everyone. Hi, oh my goodness, what a nice crowd of folks coming. Hi, can you write in the chat where you're from? My granddaughter would say, where are you at? So we can just have a sense of where you are. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna just welcome you and welcome my friends. It's so nice to have friends who will just hop in a call with you when you ask them to. It's a really good thing. I will introduce you to, hi Karen, welcome from New Mexico. Ruby Sales, Ruby Nell Sales, who many of us call Mother Ruby or Mama Ruby, is, I don't know, a civil rights long distance runner for justice. She organized Lowndes County when she was just a mere teenager toward voting rights and has been doing work to make the world a better place ever since. She is just amazing. She's off camera today, just because she needs to have some space for herself. And we're so glad you're here. That you can tell that's her because her name is there. I want to introduce Nelba Márquez-Greene, who is the founder of the Anna Grace Project. She is a therapist and a mom and a teacher and a musician. And we are new friends who feel like we've known each other forever. So Nelba, thank you so much for coming today. My colleague and friend, Amanda Hambrick Ashcraft, sometimes feels like a sister from another mother. We have very much the same energy. She is a wonderful writer and activist and organizer, still a consulting minister at Middle Church, a mom, and she's the founder of the Raising Imagination Project. I'm so glad she's here. And as soon as we get a little tech straight, V, formerly Eve Ensler, will be joining us as well. She's okay. Hi, V. She is a prolific author, artist, organizer, global impact on women's issues. So we're so glad to have V with us. Hey, friend, I'm glad you're here. So we're gonna pop around the square, and I'm Jacqui Lewis. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the senior minister at Middle Church. Hey, V, it's good to see you. Hi.
Hi.
So we're gonna just kick this off with a question, for each of my guests. But we're gonna have a conversation about voting and what's at stake in this election and what it means to us to vote like a mother, And we'll talk to each other, we'll talk with you. We hope there'll be time in the end for Q&A. I wanna make sure we have that. And Ruby wants to remind us right up top that any of the things that we're saying are not from a perspective of like being a monolith, right? We are diverse women. These issues are diverse issues. They are not siloed issues. They're all about a whole and well society. So with that in mind, Mama Ruby, I'm going to come to you first. I've been so inspired. Excuse me. I have been so inspired by the longevity of your work in the globe to make a healed and whole world. But especially, I feel like whenever I talk to you, you take me right to some essential issues that are sometimes not as obvious as others. And right now, you've been taking me to the gutting of the Civil Rights Act, and you've also been taking me to affirmative action and how these erosions are breaking your heart. I just want to say that out loud and ask you to speak a bit about what your passion is right now, what you're worried about, what you're concerned about, okay? You've got the mic, my love.
Well, what I'm concerned about, first of all, thank you so much for having me as a conversation partner on issues that are very, very central to our survival. In a capitalist technocracy where very few lives matter and Black and brown lives matter least of all lives. And so we're here. One of the things that I've been thinking deeply about is how many groups of people are becoming disposable waste in a society where 1% of white men in this country own 95% of the wealth, and 90%. I'm sorry, and we have 90% of us, 95% of us are here. 1%. Can you imagine how 95% of people trying to share 1% of wealth? Do you understand the animosity, the fighting, the the stratifications, all of what we are seeing played out today. And so I think that we must develop a 21st century political discourse where we speak in tongues about the human condition. So we look at issues like voting rights. There's a reason why voting rights is on the ballot today. It has to do with the fact that precisely because of the scarcity of resources, the fact that we're disposable waste, and Black and brown people are the most disposable. And so because we are disposable in a capitalist technocracy where the labor project of human labor is being replaced by robots, digitalization, and automation, and Black people's importance to America has always been our labor. Our labor is no longer useful in a technocracy, and therefore we are the most disposable. And that there's a correlation between that reality and the assault on our voting rights, state-sanctioned murder of Black people by police, and also the decimation of affirmative rights. And so I think that we have got to understand these issues within a larger and a broader 21st century context. Now let's talk about voting rights. For African Americans, voting rights has always been an expression of belonging, about establishing the fact that we belong and that we have a right to participate in shaping the American project in advancing democracy. And without voting rights, a people become invisible. They are stateless people. They no longer matter, they no longer count, and they're invisible. And so that Black people the question of voting rights for Black people is not a new issue. It is an issue that goes all the way back to post-emancipation America, where Black men were given the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. And white response to that was immediate and violent. Between the years of 1866 and 1910, there were massacres of 75 Black communities in this country over the right to vote, because voting rights is essential to freedom in a democracy. And Black freedom has always, from the moment of captivity, been seen as a threat to white freedom and white power. And so that it is within this long range context that we must situate the question of voting rights. And voting rights is not, you see, it's a larger question for Black people than voting rights. It's also the question of freedom. And so when you just focus merely on voting rights, you take the power out of the hands of the people and you put them in the hands of politicians. Voting is important in this season because it gives us an opportunity to plan a strategy for survival and for political renewal without being killed. And that's why voting rights is really important, without experiencing gross repression, but it is not the end and be all. And so that politicians are only as strong as grassroots people are. And so in addition to voting rights, we have to also simultaneously build up a grassroots movement, or movements, I should say. Let me just say something quickly about affirmative action. Affirmative action is a very important question because without race, which becomes a cornerstone of Black struggle in this country against the forces of white supremacy, if you erase race, then you say that our struggle have no legs to stand on. It says that it takes us all the way back to Dred Scott, to the Dred Scott decision that said that Black people had no rights, that white people were bound to respect. And so here we are again. So the question is, why do these issues keep coming up? Why is Black freedom a threat to white freedom? Why is it that Black people are experiencing more violence today from police than they did during the whole years of lynching, from mob violence? So these are critical questions that we must put within a larger context.
Ruby, thank you so much for that important framing. Today in my sermon, I was talking about white rage and Black grief, and how much rage there is about Black freedom. And I wonder why is it there's such a pernicious, almost permanent threat to whiteness from Black freedom?
Because of how Black, the first encounter that white Europeans had with African Americans, which was the captivity and enslavement of free peoples. Don't forget, Africans were free peoples when we were enslaved. And so the very nature of the economic and the social apparatus in America depended on the captivity and enslavement of African Americans, coupled with the genocide and the theft of Native American lands in this country. And so that freedom from people of color, most particularly African American, who really fertilized the slavery industrial complex in this country, and who made it possible for European Americans to go into an industrial society. And so Black freedom threatens all of that in the mind. Black freedom is antithetical to white supremacy. Black freedom is antithetical to fascism. And we think about, when we look at democracy in this country, when we look at America, we must look at it with simultaneous lens. One stream flows towards democracy, and the other stream has always flowed towards fascism, because in Southern apartheid was nothing short of fascism or authoritarianism. And in the North, simultaneously, you had movements developing like the abolitionist movement, the labor movement, all of these movements that were trending towards building democracy. So when we look at American society, and in the South, you had Black freedom movements. And so although the white South was fascist, the Black South is deeply grounded in freedom and freedom and democracy. So we've got to really attend to these different variations when we talk about freedom struggles in this country. And we have got to understand that indigenous to the whole white psychic is a terrible fear of Black freedom, because Black captivity and white identity is tied into the power and the economic perks derived from Black captivity and containment. And containment is an important feature of white supremacy, whether it was the containment of Black people in prisons called plantations, whether it was the containment of Black people in prisons called ghettos, whether it was the containment of Black people in prisons called jails and real prisons. White supremacy has always predicated itself on containment and surveillance.
Wow. Thank you, Ruby. When you say that, it's so plain, right? That the formula for white wealth, white supremacy, white domination includes Black captivity, Black disenfranchisement, right? It's part of it. Thank you, Ruby. I'm gonna just pivot to V for a second. V, I'm so glad to see you. What Ruby describes about, let's say, the white supremacy project demanding Black captivity, is that true about gender as well from your point of view, V? No? Okay. Can you just talk to us a bit about the gender dynamics, and especially, this lets a few people tell women that they can't have abortions project. So thank you for coming. Talk to us about that.
Thank you, Jacqui, and thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you, Ruby, for what you just said, because I think the whole idea of Black freedom being a threat to white freedom is so at the core of this election. And I think we are really looking at an election that is about fascism, versus freedom. It's that
Right.
essential, right? And I've never seen fascism exist without the suppression of women. It's always one and the same, as well as suppression of Black people, of Jewish people, of other, of what is other than quote white, right? And I think one of the things I'm really, really struck by right now is that our country is, I'm just thinking of the election in Brazil, which seems very, very parallel to what's going on with us here. You know, Lula won by literally, he got 50.10% of the vote, and Bolsonaro got 49. It was 1%. Okay, that divide in that country. And it was really the same divide between racist, hateful, anti-earth, anti-indigenous, everything Ruby's talking about, a few people owning everything, white supremacist, evangelical, hatred of women, hatred of LGBTQ versus, and definitely the destruction of the earth and Amazon versus the opposite, which is love of the people, rising up the workers, honoring the workers, respecting women, respecting the indigenous, and honoring the earth. And I think there's so much on at stake in these elections. These are not minor elections. It's huge. I mean, democracy, voting rights, judges. I mean, judges. How many judges? Racial justice, climate justice, banning of books, holding Trump accountable, right? It will really determine whether Trump decides to run again, right? But I want to talk about abortion because we are seeing a trend across the world, a racist, patriarchal, capitalist trend, fascist trend against women's rights everywhere on this planet. And we only have to look to the women of Iran who are bravely rising right now in the face of that fascist movement that is everywhere on this planet to know how hard it is to rise up once your rights have been absolutely eviscerated, once the fascist state has completely taken over. And believe me, Iran wasn't always like that. It happened incrementally in the same way it's happening here. They take abortion rights, they take the next rights, and before you know it, you have no rights, right? So I think what we saw happen in the Supreme Court, those judges were picked by Trump, right? They were determined by Trump. A lot of them lied and perjured themselves. A lot of them are sexual abusers themselves. But many of the governor races that we are voting for will determine access to abortion in those states. And a lot will be decided because right now a lot is being decided by the states. Abortion protections are totally on the ballot in 4 states, while competitive contests for state legislature and the governor's mansion could be critical. At the federal level, Biden has vowed that his first legislative act of the new Congress would be to codify abortion rights. If we deliver Democrats bigger majorities this November. By contrast, Republicans are saying straight out they will push for a national ban on abortion if their party retakes control of Congress. And I just have to say, these people, these patriarchs, these racist patriarchs, these fascists are insane. And the more power they get, the more insane they get. Just this week, that guy, Bo Hines, the GOP candidate for North Carolina, wants to outlaw all abortions unless the mother's life at risk. But here's his new idea. He wants victims of rape and incest to be allowed to get an abortion on a case-by-case basis through a community level review process outside the jurisdiction of the federal government. He wants to have rape panels, okay? Rape panels, where you will come, it's like misogynistic science fiction, right? And I just think about, I can imagine the trauma of undergoing a community level review of by perfect strangers who could decide if I will be forced to have my baby, right? Because of a crime done against me, right? So we're talking about, there's a lot of legislative stuff that's on the agenda of this election, but more the cultural, the political, the environmental implications of this election are so massive. They are so massive. And if we lose the House and we lose the Senate, we are going to see the beginning of the erosions of everything in such a massive way. And I just want to say, women need to go out. LGBTQ folks need to go out. We need to massively vote. We need to show that we care, that this matters, that our rights are on the line, because we will see. I was talking to my sisters in Iran this week, and they were talking about the fact, like, this didn't happen right away. It began slowly, and before women knew it, they couldn't go out of the house. They couldn't dance. They couldn't sing. They didn't have rights to their own custody of their own children when they got divorced. All these rights started getting taken away. And I think that all these things are linked. Everything Ruby is talking about. Like, if we don't celebrate Black freedom in this country at this point, if we're not standing up for that after all these years, it's linked to white supremacists wanting to control women's bodies, the bodies of Black people, the bodies of workers, the bodies of all the people she was talking about who are disposable to them. So my fantasy is that we're going to see the most massive voting at the polls, that people are just going to flood them, and they're going to be memory. I'm not listening to the New York Times, who was talking about the Republicans, ahead right now. Let's defy them. Let's prove them wrong. I've already voted, but everybody needs to get how serious this is. And we need to let the Democrats know and send a signal right now that we are going to turn this around, just like they did in Brazil. But just remember how close it was in Brazil. Every vote matters.
Matters. Thank you so much for that, Dee. Thank you so much for that. Just a quick follow-up question there for you, and then to kind of pivot over to Nelba. I was really worried, Dee, that I thought Biden was saying, if you all come to the polls and make sure we have a majority, then I'm going to do something about this. And I was thinking, but we have the majority right now. Why don't we do something about this? I was not inside enough of any faith tables to understand what the logic was there. Do you have any insight on that?
I don't. And look, I have my own issues with the Democrats, up and down, right? But I don't understand it fully, except that I know they don't have the votes, right, in the Senate at this point to push through on that. And that's all I understand. But like, I also think, like, where there's a will, there's a way. We have to get them to understand that the majority of people in this country are for rights to abortion, for a woman's right to choose, for bodily autonomy. And that is just a fact. That's indisputable. People need to vote like that now. People need to go and vote like that and not sit back.
You need to vote in a block, right? You need to vote in a block, right? For love. The reason I was so excited to have this particular panel together is because we are women, we are mothers, and we are also understanding that these issues are not siloed, right? This is about a white supremacist, white fascist takeover of our nation that has these different tentacles, right? Thank you so much, V. Nelba, let me just ask you to jump in here right there with what fascism feels about guns and life, and what your heart is feeling as we head into the polls.
So first, thank you to everyone who spoke before me, and to everyone who is listening in and choosing to spend their time with us. So first, I'd like to acknowledge this space and the holiness of it. The second thing is, of all of these wonderful, amazing speakers, I'm probably the only one that isn't an activist in this way by choice, right? I overnight became the face of an American nightmare. And that American nightmare being gun violence, right? Gun violence in a school, a mass shooting in a school. There was talk about fascism, and fascism requiring and inextricably linked to the oppression of people, the subjugation of women, Black confinement. The third-legged stool of this is the proliferation of weapons, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And that is something that is incredibly difficult to swallow, while simultaneously being a part of a victim population that everyone says we're so sorry for your loss. The angels of Newtown, right? First, let's acknowledge that gun violence exists in many places we choose not to address, we choose to ignore. We are a culture that blames, uh, particularly. Uh, Black women, Black families, when gun violence happens in cities, when gun violence happens in places that perhaps are denied the world's empathy. Another thing is we often need the perfect victim in order to mourn them, right? So victims that are six and are murdered in school receive a different level of empathy than, even look at the mass shooting at the grocery store in Buffalo, right? That was a mass shooting, but somehow I think because of age and because of race, we kind of, oh, maybe they live long lives and maybe we excuse. So there are many. I am here, I guess, to speak to the heart, which is, you don't want to be me. Please vote because you don't want to be me. I have made Beauty for Ashes for 10 years. I have. And it is still a beautiful life. We have a foundation. We do great work. But to live this reality, I want to talk about the reality of what it's like to ignore some of these issues that are on the ballot, right? I am one of them. And this is Connecticut. It's a pretty small state. You could say the state grieved with us, right? We were also a state that showed up 3,000 individuals strong for Marjorie Taylor Greene when she visited recently. So I'd like to talk about love and power. And for that, there is a quote. And that's, what is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands in the way of love. And of course, that's a quote by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And I just want to align what I know about love with our vote. And that's what I would wish for people, to align what we know about love with your vote. So I know that in this group, I'm preaching to the choir. But I would like us all to extend out to people who suggest, they love the families of, they love Anna Grace Marquez Greene's families. They love, women, or they love, well, show me, right? Because there is something to be said for telling me I'm sorry for your loss on December 14th, or when it's a tender day, maybe her birthday, and then voting against me on Tuesday, right? There is something to be said for that. It doesn't feel like love. It feels like abandonment. It feels like lies. It doesn't feel that way to me. So, um, yeah.
Thank you, Nelba. Nelba, when your baby was killed, many of us went to DC on a bus right away and got in this anti-gun movement. And you and I have talked about this before. Like, we think, well, if we couldn't get our act together about guns, then, when would we ever do it? And just kind of tying together what you're saying about fascism requiring, a militia, if you will, requiring weapons,
Mhm.
and putting that together with Ruby's Black confinement, right? Is it possible, like, we who've done our work now understand that the Second Amendment comes from needing a militia to patrol slaves and get their behinds back in, slavery. Is it possible that the American psyche somehow intuits that without the guns, more Black people would be free, more people would be free, like without the guns? In other words, does the Second Amendment stand strong in our imagination because policing Black and brown bodies stands strong in our imagination?
I have to be honest, it's the only thing that makes sense to me, right? The same people who grieved alongside me and carried us, right, from 2012, I saw a shift and a change in their perspective in late 2015 and early 2016, at the election of, or the race, it was misogyny and racism, right? And it was in the church. I think one of the things that hasn't been brought up yet is how many churches are actually encouraging and making soft beds for fascism in the pew. So we don't talk about how there's something we fear more than a dead 6-year-old in the bathroom of an elementary school. And I think that is Black freedom. And that is terrifying, right? Terrifying, galling, should wound us, and we should weep, but we should also show up at the polls and start having those conversations with our neighbors in any way that we can, right? I have friends who have children who are young men and women of all colors, but especially with my white friends, I sit down and I ask the kids, tell me what it's like at school for you. Tell me what it's like when kids start talking about these kinds of things. How do you stay away from? So we just need to have more conversations. And again, I want to say before I get a million calls, you I believe in gun ownership. I just think we need a call to truth about what it is we're uncomfortable with, because the only way we're uncomfortable with so much death is if something else is behind it. And I do think our biggest fear is Black freedom and women in power and all of these other things. And I just thank you for allowing me to be here tonight to say that.
I thank you so much for saying it. Thank you. It's like one of those, you know, I've been getting really freaky, nerdy, geeky about psychology right in here. Like, what is happening? I'm trying to analyze what is at work in this just rabid commitment to the status quo, which is so wounding to so many of us. Makes me feel like there's a desperate desire to cling to some reality. And I think that's it. Domination of the ones who are Black and brown and queer and yeah. Amanda, let me invite you to come in right there and just what Nelba just said. Yes, yes. What else can it be? Fear of Black freedom, the loathing of Black freedom. It makes me think about apartheid South Africa, or it made me think about the slave rebellions as they were happening. Like the idea that Black people would actually get free, and that if we actually get free, we might just kill all the white people. That's like the bottom line to me. Like we just might kill them all. And you and I have had a million talks about race in our time together. So talk about white, from a white woman, progressive white woman's perspective, what in the heck is going on with white supremacy reigning supreme in all the places, in the church places, right? This kind of nationalist, fake Christianity that wants to subdue us. Can you talk about that some?
It's horrible. That's the opening adjective on the tip of my tongue. And I want to thank you, Jacqui, for having me, and also Nelba and Ruby and V for being in conversation today too. Whiteness and its pervasiveness and its the way that it is able to be this powerful in this country is also so invisible in so many ways, because it is just the way that things function, and it's supposed to be it is supposed to be the norm. And so it is a thing that white people are able to not talk about and not have to own and not have to think is continually there and continually something that we have to divest from and examine and think about and organize against in every election, and not just in election seasons, but in every aspect of our lives. And, Nelba hit on this a little bit, but, I think specific to this election, which I will say to this group, but I'm not saying publicly because I want to keep the momentum going. I am scared. I'm scared. I'm terrified about what could happen on Tuesday. And so I am so hopeful that people continue to turn out with progressive values and with collective liberation on their mind as they go to the polls. Because if we don't, there is so much at stake, which people have already alluded to. And one thing we have to be very specific about that is also on the ballot is white Christian nationalism, bodily autonomy, the erosion of voting rights, Black freedom, horrible gun laws, all those things, and white Christian nationalism is on the ballot. And we are either voting for that or we are voting against that when we go to the polls on Tuesday. And, when we think, white Christian nationalism has been a little bit of a buzzword recently. And I think, some people may have just some questions about exactly what that is. And there is some nuance with it, right? Because at the same time, we have to own that America is not a Christian nation, and we are a nation shaped by Christianity, specifically Protestantism. And so we have to hold both of those things together, and we have to reject this belief, which white Christian nationalism projects, that we were founded as a Christian nation, and we have to remain that way. And to be a good American is to be a Christian, because that movement right in and there is undergirded by white supremacy and racial subjugation. And it is not something that is just on the peripheral. It's not just on the outskirts. 61% of Republicans support saying that this is a Christian nation. And so it's absolutely on the ballot, and it is something that we have to be, in all the ways that we organize, intentional about organizing against. And, Jacqui, just to go back to this, maybe I'm shifting a little bit in my thinking about how we might use actually what we're calling this conversation as an antidote, as a possibility for change. You called us into a conversation titled "Vote Like a Mother." And I think that's so powerful for many reasons. Two specifically, I have a friend named Sarah who went to a protest about 6 years ago, and she wrote on her sign, "Vote Like a Mother." And that actually spurred a movement, spurred a nonprofit, which has now kind of folded into Chamber of Mothers. But it started this whole movement called Vote Like a Mother. Some of you may have a t-shirt from that or something, but with this whole idea of what if we really did vote, with this collective notion that we have to take care of all the children with a nurturing instinct, in the most progressive and collective sense of what it means to mother. What if we really did do that? That sense of Ubuntu, which you talk so much about, especially in your book, Jacqui. But here's where it gets difficult in a lot of conversations that I have with other white people. That sense of Ubuntu is a hard leap for them, for us. And I don't mean to separate me from that. And that is shameful to say, but it's the truth. When I have conversations with white people and I say, but we have to understand that they're our neighbor, that everyone is our neighbor, that child is also my child, and so is that child and that child and that child. That jump, not everyone can get to. And that's just the reality that I have come with, that I have began to understand. However, this call to vote like a mother, I think, has some underlying brilliance to it. I'll say this and then I'll be quiet. Because, and this goes to the psychology piece too, Jacqui, that you're bringing up, like what's going on in our heads. In that book, why good people are divided by politics and religion, Jonathan Haidt says that the space in our brains to actually conceptualize change is less to nothing. It's like basically not there. We're kind of really just rooted in our ways. That's just the truth. Unless we have something in common with the person or a shared prior experience. When we do, that space in our brain to conceptualize change all of a sudden starts to get a little bit bigger. And so when we say to someone, vote like a mother, we are starting with very basic human values of empathy. And I could say to you, what does that mean to you to vote like a mother, Jacqui? What are some things that are important to you? Well, I want my kids not to be hungry. I want kids to have a good education. I don't want them actually to be victims of a gun tragedy in their school. I want them not to be bullied. What are some things that probably most mothers in this country would say? I don't want them to be killed on the street, whatever it is, then we can start to say, well, let's talk about how that translates to who you're voting for. And then all of a sudden we have connected in a place with a potential for change. And so as much as I am stressed out and terrified and have so many conversations and things that we still need to do, especially with white Christian people, I do think this whole notion of voting like a mother is a real avenue for change for us, because we can think at it both from the collective and from the individual. How might that change one person's mind when we can meet them at that very starting point? Oh, you're muted, Jacqui.
I'm saying that's really beautiful. I think Nelba was the first person I talked to about coming. And when I said, I'm going to no, Ruby first, vote like a mother. We loved the double entendre, like both like a mother, but also then we checked, like, and we remembered that vote like a mother movement that happened, still happens. They also are connected to Mom's Demand. Yes, I think that's right, Amanda. That's a good organizing principle, right? A theory of change is that if I can feel that that what's happening to you or your kids might happen to me and my kids, and together we can build a coalition, I think that's very powerful. I think I want to just sort of add to that, because you bring up Ubuntu, in my book, Fierce Love, I'm calling Ubuntu Fierce Love. Nelba, I'm coming right to you. This place of like, it's so sad to me, is what I want to say, that we humans who all come from Africa, like what the F happened? Like we are all from the cradle of civilization. And when we first walked out of caves and we saw the light and we knew that we needed to be together, we understood what King says about love and justice, belonging together. We understood, as King would say, I can't be who I am until you are who you are. We understood Ubuntu. My thriving and your thriving are one, right? We understood it and we lost it. It's like we've lost that sense of connectivity and community and having each other's backs. I was so loud in the pulpit today, vote for my self-interest, I said, when you go to the polls, take me with you. But there's something that we've tragically lost, and I keep wondering about how to get it back. Now, but let me come to you.
So first, I want to give a shout out to Reverend Perry, who is back there organizing and holding it down, and also doing social media. One of the things about Reverend Perry is he's incredibly good at that, and he is tweeting little clips of things we're saying as we're talking. So I took a bit of time, was listening, but also checking on them, because I know that they always do this, and quoted something that I said, and the first response already is, I want to read it to you as it appears, right? Because it goes against the spirit of Ubuntu, right? It's, what about the abandonment of, so they are, Reverend Perry quotes me, right? And about gun violence, and the response, what about the abandonment of our responsibility to raise and educate kids so that they don't become criminals that shoot people? Rather than whine about guns, let's focus on that first. So there is already an assumption, right, that when someone is lost to gun violence is because they have done something wrong. When someone is going to get an abortion, it's because they have done something wrong. When someone bad, there's all that works against us too. We have lost the humanity in our walk. We have lost the sense of being there for our neighbor, and it's just incredibly important, because there will have to be a team on the other end for the outcomes of whatever the results of the election, right? Those people who will suffer the consequences, those parents living in those states that are loving their children to the best of their ability and allowing them to live who they are, with laws that are being passed saying that they can't be something that aligns with who they know they are, those states that will have people that will rescind abortion access, there will have to be a team picking those people up. And if the church isn't ready to be a part of that team, then we're not doing church. We're doing
Amen.
something else. And I want to be a part of church.
Me too. Tweet this, Ben. Tweet this, Ben. Come to the table with some solutions, whoever's writing that. come to this table with solutions about how we as a human family can help all of our children survive and thrive. Yes, I think we can teach children how not to be violent and how to be peacemakers. Yes, I think we, Amanda does a whole lot of work on raising imagination. Nelba's work in her wonderful Anna Grace spaces, children learning early how to love each other across their gender and differences. That's Ruby's work through Spirit House Project. That's our work at Middle. That's V's work around the globe, raising little people to love each other. Yes, we must do that. But can't we also, as the grown-ups, shelter them from our bigotry and our violence and our hatred and our uncivil conversation? They're watching us. Can't we imagine that the way we talk about each other and to each other shapes the next violent generation? Tweet that, Ben. Let's try to do better than that.
Can I just say something about
Jump in there, Ruby.
about children watching us? When we think about bullying today, what we fail to understand is that white supremacy predicates itself on bullying others, using your power to smash people down. White supremacy is bullying. And so children who do bullying, that doesn't come out of anywhere. That's a replication of the very system that they see operating every day in their schools, in their neighborhoods, on television. And so that we've got to contextualize these things within a broader context. And also when we talk about vote like a mother, what I like about that is the possibility of democratization, the possibility of dealing with the specific issues that impact one group of mothers and the specific issues that impact another group of mothers. In addition, not only just dealing with what we have in common, but respecting what things are different for us and organizing around those differences. For example, for Black children, it's not just a question of getting a good education. It's the question of not attending militarized schools. Black kids attend militarized public schools where they are being put in jail at 5 years old for having temper tantrums in classrooms. And so when we talk about the efficacy of bodies, that then gets to the question, do the bodies of young Black children matter? And so in addition to talking about abortion, we've got to broaden, we've got to democratize that conversation and ask the question, when Black men go out in the street and they are shot 95 times by the police, do their bodies matter? When Black women die at the birthing stool 4 times at the rate of white women, do their bodies matter? And so that in addition, and if we don't talk about those issues, that feeds into the moral ambiguity that women have about abortion, who come from societies where their children were not meant to survive, period. Their children were not meant to survive, and neither were they. Another question that I think that we must deal with is this whole question of meaning. What does it mean to be an American today? Whose story gets told and whose story is left out? And that the prevalence of white supremacy creates a certain dynamic that I call the cannibalization of the best in white America. Because take someone like Liz Cheney, truly she cares about democracy, but at the same time, she cannibalizes it. That part of her that deals with whiteness, she ends up cannibalizing it, voting against voting rights, voting against LGBTQ issues, voting against climate control. All of those things are antithetical to the very best in herself that she's expressing in terms of her struggle for democracy. And the other thing that I think that we've got to move away from is demonization. While Donald Trump is the poster boy for white supremacy, he's not the apex of it. He's not the center of it. And yes. And so when you focus on Donald Trump, that means that not only do we not focus on other people, but we also don't focus on our own internalized white supremacy, that is out there and it's not in us. And so that that we've got to begin to deal with the white supremacy, the misogyny, the heterosexism that we all internalize. And how is it that we can begin to develop a new consciousness movement of the 21st century that not only looks out at the world, but also begins with us in terms of our internal lives. And when I say to people what's on the ballot today are the questions of gentrification, food deserts, hospital deserts, transportation deserts, job insecurity, climate. You just can't say to people, vote. So when we talk to people to vote, we must also make sure that in those words are the issues that impact people. Why is it that in New York City, which is considered a smart city, why is it that rich white people are having access to cities in a technocracy and poorer people, economically dispossessed people, no matter the color, can no longer afford to live in smart cities? And so you're pushing everybody out into these rural sites of desolation, where I believe are going to be sites of total conflict over the scarcity of resources. And so when you're pushing people out of cities into sites of desolation, you're developing 21st century ghettos in rural sites of terror. And so that we've got to begin to speak the language of freedom for people, to let people know that they are included in our words when we say vote. It's not just enough to talk about one issue. It's important that we begin to speak in tongues, that we develop an intersectional discourses of the 21st century that allow us to speak in tongues about the human condition. And even as we think about the right of women to claim their bodies, think about Black men, think about brown men, think about the high number of sterilization, not only of Black women, but Mexican American women, Puerto Rican women, Native American women in this country. Those are body control issues also when you're sterilized at high rates and this is why many women do not come to support us, because we talk about issues in such a one-dimensional way. So I think that it's really important to vote, because it gives us an opportunity to reframe our conversations with each other and to build new bridges and struggle towards each other.
Ruby, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that really prophetic summary and calling in. I want to see if I'm breathing with that. I want to ask the people who are here, because I love saving chats. Somebody wrote, what about Wednesday morning? Can you just take a second, y'all, and write in the chat what you're thinking? Like, you are here, what are you thinking? What can happen Wednesday? We'll save it. What can Thursday? What are you thinking? Okay, yep, yes, yes. Then we're gonna share this, right? So write in the chat what you're thinking, and then Dee, Nelba, Amanda, a 30-second something from you, and then I'm gonna close us, okay? So give us your best takeaway moment, okay? Something that you want us to take away. This beautiful group of people. Thank you all for coming on a Sunday afternoon. So wonderful to have you. So who will go first? Nelba, will you go first? Is that okay?
This is preparing for Wednesday morning, no matter the outcome.
No, this is your closing statement for today. Somebody asked that in the chat, and we'll come back to a Wednesday action. What would you like folks to take away today from you?
My closing statement will actually address that too. The most
Great.
difficult conversation I've ever had to say to my child, my surviving child at 8 years old, was, I'm sorry this has taken your sister, and your sister is dead. The second most difficult thing I've ever had to say to my son is, I am so sorry Donald Trump won the election in 2016. I think a care plan for Wednesday morning includes knowing, regardless of the outcome, we are a people that needs to prepare for the people that will be most harmed by whatever it is that happens. And part of that includes our own work, our own whatever it is we need in that moment, because the road is long. I've gotten a chance to be with many, many leaders, including Marian Wright Edelman, and she reminds me and has reminded me that we can be tired, but we can't stop. So that is my message for closing.
Thank you, Nelba. That's so beautiful, so powerful, so important. V, will you go next?
I think what I want to say is something that Ruby was talking about, the intersectionalness of it all, that there are no issues that are separate from any other issues. And we often just focus on, I mean, I was asked to talk about abortion tonight, so that's why I focused on that. But I could have easily talked about climate justice or racial justice or anything else. And I think part of what has to happen in this country is we all have to get out of our silos in the same way that we all have to work more deeply on where it is we don't see, who we don't see, who we don't care about, who isn't valuable to us or meaningful to us, who we walk by, who we ignore. And our vote has to be in consideration of all of them and all of that. And part of it is, I think we get so used to what's going to get people to the polls. Well, if we talk about abortion, that will get them. We talk about the economy. But in fact, the truth of the matter is, what's on the line right now is that question Ruby asked, is what does it mean to be a person of this country right now? What do you believe? What is your framework? Do you believe that every single person here matters? And the welfare of those people, where they live, how they eat, the healthcare they receive, the protections they get, the safety they live in matters? Or do you believe only a few people matter? And those people get to set the agenda and determine the reality for everybody else. It's really, in some levels, that simple. And I think when people go to vote, think about all of the issues that go into determining whether we are living in a country of care, of collaboration, of love, of community, of understanding that there is no freedom. There is no freedom unless every single one of us is free. And there's no safety unless all of us are safe. And if we haven't learned that in the last years, my God, like this is the moment to manifest that at the polls.
Thank you so much, V. Thank you so much. Amanda?
I'm also sticking with something that Ruby said when, Ruby, you said, speak the language of freedom. And I think as we go to the polls on Tuesday, we got to speak the language of freedom with what levers we pull and with who we vote for. And also, no matter what happens on Wednesday, we have to keep speaking the language of freedom. And for white people especially, that has to happen in all the time. And sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. I know that's a difficult word, because uncomfortable for who, and it's not the same for white people and Black people. But, you know, just a really quick example. You know, Skylar, my 6-year-old, said something this week that didn't sit right with me, and I was dissecting it with her. And I said, if you call someone real and someone else not real, then you're stripping someone of their humanity, and that's not cool. And it was just me and her sitting at home. And she said, but Mom, nobody else is here. Nobody's listening. And I said, that doesn't matter. I said, because what we do around the table and what we say, even when nobody else is listening, is going to affect what we think and what we do when we're outside these doors. And so it's a whole mindset shift. It's a whole saying to people all the time, no, we've got to be speaking the language of freedom 24/7.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Ruby, one last thing from you. Anything?
Yes,
We're all holding you back because you're so fierce. Go ahead.
I would like to quote an old Black song. Walk together, children, don't you get weary, because there's hope in history. And no matter what happens on Wednesday or Tuesday night, remember that tyrants never continue forever, that they always fall. That once there was an empire called the British Empire that used to brag that the sun did not rise or set on its possessions, and today it's a pale wisp of itself. And so that's what and also we must begin to develop a freedom language where we no longer call people marginalized as an ultimate absolute definition of who they are. Because I might be marginalized within the state, but freedom says that I'm essential to myself, to my people, and to you. And so that we must stop using absolute definition that reinforce not freedom, but oppression. And finally, I want to say to each of us, our task is to empty ourselves of a culture of whiteness that degrades all of us, that contains all of us in very small spaces that do not allow us to reach the possibilities of our goodness. And that it is not a privilege whiteness is not a privilege, it's a death sentence. Because it cuts you off from other people. It creates a constant angst about others. That's not a privilege. The only way you think whiteness is a privilege is that if you think that materialism is the ultimate expression of a good life. But if you believe that consciousness and spirituality are expressions of a good life, then clearly the white supremacy or whiteness is antithetical to that. So I would say to each of us that our task is to locate the good in ourselves and also to look out and see the good in others and to call themselves to that goodness, even when they themselves don't see it.
Thank you, Ruby. And friends, I will just close with some thank you and a blessing about connectedness. I just want to say thank you so much to Ben, who's always willing to throw a last minute thing together with me. So thank you for that, Ben. And thank you all for coming in at the last minute. It just felt in my spirit that I wanted to have a conversation with some women that I love and respect, to call us all to vote like a mother. And so thank you for playing in the space, meaning
vote like a mother, everybody. Vote like a mother. Vote like a mother.
Really love that. Really like vote like a mother. Vote like a mother. So here's what I'm praying for. This Ubuntu idea that is not at all trite, but is very powerful. A person is a person through other people. This Zulu expression means that there's no individual human. Umuntu, Ngubuntu, Ngabantu. I did that to impress you, Nelba, my Zulu talk. A person is a person through other persons. I see you, I exist. You complete me. Tom Cruise. I am who I am because you are who you are. Every human on this planet and every human in this nation is connected to us. They're thriving and they're surviving is incumbent upon us. So I want us to vote like a mother, like a sister, like an auntie, like a brother, like a cousin, like a friend, like a lover, and take our neighbor's self-interest with us to the polls. Take me with you to the polls. Take Amanda's children, take Nelba's boy, take Dee's family, take Ruby's projects, take us together to the polls. Not in a selfish way we go to the polls, but we go to the polls understanding that the decisions we make when we pull that lever has something to do with the person next to you. What kind of humans do we want to be? What kind of nation do we want to be? And can we make a nation where the least of us, the ones who are most injured by the way the state of our union is, can we make it better for them and vote that way? It is a tough job, Claudia, and I think it's our job. So blessings to you. Please don't stay home. Please call your people. V, Nelba, Amanda, Ruby, y'all.
Vote like a mother.
Vote like a
Vote like a mother. Vote like a mother.
Vote, vote, vote.